those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose rapture.
There's few game series that seem to divide fans as much as BioShock does. I mean, anyone who's played any of these games has a real staunch opinion on which they think is the best. But I think most people would agree that Irrational Games kind of shit the bed a little bit with BioShock Infinite. Released in 2013 for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and Microsoft Windows, it received glowing praise from critics. But then again, that's pretty standard for most AAA titles anyway. The next Call of Duty game could be a turd in a case and it would still get 8s and 9s out of 10. You know what, maybe shitting the bed isn't the best analogy to use, and when I say this, I don't mean in terms of the visuals or the gameplay, more so a storyline that is utterly confusing and often doesn't make a lick of sense. To make matters worse, it keeps digging the hole deeper and deeper right through to the game's ending, which is a kaleidoscope of bad ideas. Now at the time there was two groups of gamers both praising and condemning this game, and upon release both of them had good and bad points, which I'm going to try to address in this review. I think I should mention I'm going to be talking about a few minor plot points, and if you think that's going to spoil the game for you, Sonny Jim, then skip ahead to the time code on the screen. So the game opens up with the protagonist Booker being dropped at a lighthouse in the middle of the ocean, and shortly after this you're launched into the sky and told your mission is to find and rescue a girl being held hostage in the floating city of Columbia.
Hallelujah.
The place under rule by a man called Comstock.
The Lord forgives everything, but I'm just a prophet, so I don't have to.
It turns out Booker has some kind of debt that he has to deal with, and rescuing this girl from this magical floating city is apparently the only way he can do this. Now, I'm one of the few people who doesn't have a problem with the whole floating city idea. I mean, it's no more fantastical than a city under the sea, so let's just roll with it. Moving on, despite multiple warnings for Booker to stay undetected, he participates in some kind of sideshow and totally blows his cover like an asshole. After killing a few dozen innocent people, he meets up with the girl he's supposed to rescue, who looks and talks like a Disney princess, and the two of you are then on the run from Comstock's men.
Are you real?
Real enough.
Despite being a shut-in her entire life, Elizabeth is a social butterfly, and Booker convinces her to come along with him under the guise he's going to take her to Paris. We learn she's some kind of freak of nature who has the ability to open portals to other dimensions, what the game refers to as tears.
Oh no!
Close it.
I'm trying!
Close it!
There's some really cool sequences where they explore this idea and develop the relationship between the two characters, and you really see how much she flourishes after escaping confinement. Of course, it doesn't last all that long as the two get separated over a disagreement. Then Booker ends up having to assist a militia group called the Vox Populi in acquiring a bunch of weapons for an uprising against Comstock. Elizabeth then joins up with him again as she's left with no alternatives, and then they end up having to go through alternate dimensions because the dimension they inhabit has had events unfold in certain ways that prevent them from getting these weapons for the militia, or something like that. And this is where things start to get really confusing. In the second half of the game, it gets even more confusing when time travel is introduced, and this is what people mean when they talk about how stupid the story is in this game. It's like a little kid making up the rules to a game he's playing in the backyard with his friends and siblings to suit his own purposes. You know that friend we all had in school? You're playing cops and robbers in the backyard and you're like, hey, I shot you, you're dead. And he goes, nuh-uh, I had a bulletproof vest on the whole time. I think we all had a friend like that. You know who you are, Daryl. BioShock Infinite also lacks the multiple endings and moral choices of the prior games as well. There's moments where you're forced to make binary decisions, but they don't ultimately affect the ending at all. And some of them are just cosmetic.
I don't like this.
Yeah, send in the bird. We're ready to...
Stay where you are!
For a game that tries to do so many things, it ultimately lacks any real consequences or any choices that have a meaningful effect on the story or affect the game in any real way.
The one on the right.
Are you sure?
Now that's all I'm going to say about the story in this game. There's plenty of people out there who've done these 40-minute long Wikipedia style videos about what is wrong with the plot in this game, and they'd cover it far better than I ever could. But I do think they're missing the fact that underneath all of this is still a competent shooting game. Instead of plasmids, the game uses something called vigors, and Eve is replaced with salts, which function entirely the same, and a lot of these vigors are carbon copies of those from BioShock 1 and 2. Shock Jockey, for instance, is basically the same as Electrobolt, and Murder of Crows is near identical to Insect Swarm. But how Infinite differs is you can now upgrade these plasmids 2 times, which makes them crazy overpowered at the cost of it being expensive as shit. Upgrading Shock Jockey allows it to chain to defeated enemies, popping their heads like champagne corks in the process. Charge is a vigor that lets you ram into enemies for massive damage, and when it's upgraded, it refills your shield upon contact with an enemy, essentially making you temporarily unstoppable. Possession allows you to turn enemies or turrets onto your side for a short period of time, which is useful in large gunfights. Return Descender is like a small shield that catches bullets and projectiles, allowing you to throw them back at your opponent, similar to telekinesis from the prior games. But I'd say my favourite is Bucking Bronco, which launches enemies into the air, then slams them down when you shoot them, causing massive damage. Unlike the previous game, you get access to all of these throughout the campaign, though you still have to decide which ones to spend your hard-earned cash on. Weapons can also be upgraded, again at a high cost, allowing increased damage, accuracy, reload times, and so forth. There's a bunch of different guns, and then there's also alternate versions of these weapons as well, which are like hand-me-down versions used by the Vox Populi. The highest difficulty mode also lowers the amount of supplies you come across, making your choices even more important. Even on the normal setting, this is a pretty tough game, but satisfying. When you get that combination of weapons and vigors that clicks, it kinda takes on a whole new level, and you really do feel like an absolute badass. The music and sound effects during these moments really amps up, heightening the frantic nature of the combat. I think the only downside to the shooting is that it limits you to 2 weapons at a time, but aside from this, it's great fun. Summer Comstock's men are able to use vigors against Booker, and these guys can be tough as a coffin nail. And on top of that, you're also up against these big robots called motorized patriots, which are kind of like watered down big daddies that chase after you with a crank gun spouting off patriotic jargon. Then there's the handymen, which are like big daddies on steroids. Handymen are poor sods put into mechanical suits that apparently causes them great pain as they lunge around beating the crap out of everything that gets in their way. The combat areas are generally like these mini arenas, giving you lots of opportunities for cover, and utilizing Elizabeth's abilities where you can open tears and spawn in useful elements like spare ammunition, health, cover, or even turrets and motorized patriots. Aside from that, she'll also throw Booker ammo or other important items during mid-fight.
Catch, Booker!
What also gives the combat a fair bit of depth are the skylines, which are these roller coaster tracks that are weaved throughout the city. Enemies will give chase if you're on these things, and aside from being able to fire back when you're riding them, you can also target an enemy, leap off the track, and obliterate them with a powerful melee hit. There's a lot of things to consider, especially later in the game when all of these elements are present during gameplay, and I just don't understand how some people could call the shooting boring in this game. If you're getting cut to ribbons by a turret, possess the damn thing and give yourself a bit of breathing room. Got a bunch of enemies firing at you? Well, stun them for a few seconds with Murder of Crows, or just ignite the whole bunch with Devil's Kiss. I'm sorry, but if you're just shooting everyone with a gun and complaining about how boring it is, well, you're not playing the game right. Another common complaint you often hear is how the level design is a lot more simpler than the prior games. Again, I think that's total horse shit. The levels are linear during those moments when you're being forced to progress onward, but you're always free to go back and explore the area, and there is a crapload of hidden content, often rewarding you with extra gear, items, and ammo. And we haven't even mentioned the downright gorgeous visuals on offer, the amazing art style, the weapon effects, and the soundtrack. Columbia is a gorgeous city brought to life by the Unreal 3 engine, and aside from a few stale animations here and there, this is a game with an incredible amount of visual polish and attention to detail. Does this sound like the sort of thing you'd see in what people refer to as the worst game of 2014? And I think that's what split people up when it comes to BioShock Infinite. People giving the game the high scores were doing so because they overlooked the idiotic fallacies of the storyline. And those giving it low scores for that very same reason overlooked how competent the shooting and the gameplay was. I also think that both camps are letting their feelings for the developer get in the way of their true opinion. It was well known at the time that director Ken Levine basically admitted he knew nothing about the subject matter, in terms of the science of the whole thing, and just included it because it seems sophisticated. And whilst I don't think it deserves all the high praise, it's still in essence just a shooting game, it sure as hell doesn't deserve all the negativity. Some douchebag even wrote an article where he said it's the worst game he's played in recent memory. Hey dickhead, play more games. Hell, just play Dead Island Riptide, it came out a month after BioShock Infinite, and rethink that statement. People who say it's the worst game of 2014, or even that it's the worst game they've ever played, need to reevaluate what they consider to be a bad game. BioShock Infinite is a guilty pleasure. It's far from perfect, but it's just so damn fun at times. It's the result of hundreds of talented artists and animators creating a believable, palpable world, brought to life by a man who let his own ego get the best of him. Now look, nothing against Ken Levine, but it's plain to see that the guy didn't have enough people challenging him or arguing against certain elements when he wrote the story. We've seen this kind of thing in movies all the time, and it's the same thing with gaming. Don't tell me we've all forgotten Daikatana. In the ensuing DLC chapters, Burial at Sea Episode 1 and 2, which are great and mandatory to play, there is a sense of resolution, but the story in Infinite does suffer all the same. Having said that, I don't think it makes BioShock Infinite a bad game, and I still think it's one of the more unique first-person shooters to come along in recent years. And considering it's not just another modern-themed shooter where you're up against Russians or Middle Eastern terrorists, there is a lot of enjoyment to be had.